Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Chris Pace with Netacea, and I'll be chairing this panel discussion on bot legislation and the ethical grey area. I'm delighted to be joined by Forrester analyst Sandy Carielli, Netacea CPO Andy Still, and Netacea's principal security researcher Cyril Noel-Tago. Sandy is a principal analyst at Forrester, advising security and risk professionals on application and product security. And she has a particular emphasis on the collaboration among security, risk, and application development, as well as business teams. Andy is a pioneer of digital performance for online systems. As Chief Product Officer at Netacea, he leads the technical direction for our products, as well as providing consultancy and thought leadership to clients. And Andy has authored several books on computing and web performance, app development, and as well as on non-human web traffic. Cyril is an experienced information security professional. He spends his time researching, speaking, and writing about malicious bots and other cybersecurity topics. That sounds like a tough gig, Cyril. He is also a core contributor on the Blade framework project. We will cover a bit about the Blade later, but I would encourage you, maybe don't go off and Google it now because you need to listen to us. But if you want to know more about bots and business logic attacks, the Blade framework is an extremely useful place to start. We have much to cover and a very short amount of time. We may not actually get to all of these in the kind of depth that we would like, because there is a huge amount to talk about. There won't be presentations as such. We've got some slides that we'll be sharing, but mostly this will form a sort of free for all conversation. Hopefully we'll have some interesting things in it, and there will be some slides to support that. But these are broadly the things that we're going to cover. Why are we talking about the legislation, the potential legislation of bots, and probably also which kinds of bots are most potentially ripe for legislation? Why are items targets for bots, and why? Is there a case that bots can be used for good? How are bots affecting user experience? And then also, where do APIs and the prevalence of APIs fall into this whole narrative around automated attacks? So those are all the things that we plan to talk about in the next hour or so. We'd also encourage you to ask questions. The system gives you an option to do that, so I would encourage you to use the question pane that you have available to ask any questions that you would like to ask. So I wanted to start with, why is it that particular items are scalped, and what are those items? Now, we have a lot of data around this, so I guess, Cyril, you would be the best person to start with this question. But scalper bots are feel like a increasing challenge. What are the items that are most scalped, and why are those the most scalped items?
So I'd say there's two classes of items. There's kind of the high demand, low availability items, and then there's the underpriced items, which we're seeing more of recently. So kind of the classic high demand, low availability items, that's been things like your limited edition sneakers, your tickets, collectibles. For the last 2 years, that's been games consoles, those kinds of items. There's even been weird items like heated toilet seats we saw briefly. And then you've got your underpriced items, which again can be weird and crazy. I saw one bot advertising, this was 3 days ago, that they had been able to buy $50,000 worth of standing desks for $0 as well, and bragging that their users' posture would be unmatched. So
I feel like all of the slightly weird items that were getting scalped, like standing desks and the heated toilet seats, they all have like a COVID vibe about them, don't they? I've bought a lot of toilet paper. It's been really hard for me to get hold of it. What I now need is a heated toilet. Obviously, I need a heated toilet seat. I'm on my toilet a lot in my home during lockdown. I must have a heated toilet seat. And then the standing desk is kind of obvious. It's like a work from home. It's like a work from home thing. It's almost like COVID demand, driving up the need for some of this stuff.
Right, and I mean, and the standing desk one, that was 3 days ago, so it wasn't even a COVID related thing. It was primarily because they'd been underpriced. They were available for for $0, and these freebie bots basically look at anything which has a certain discount on it. Obviously, if something's free, then that's even better, and purchase those. So those can be quite difficult to identify, because all of a sudden, let's say you misprice something and bang, inventory's gone.
And so what are some of the, let's say, the most currently scalped items? What do we see as being the most very popular?
So at the moment, most very popular, I would say, are sneakers. So we've had, for example, the Tiffany & Co. Collaboration with Nike just a few days ago, where these were taken by scalper bots. These were taken by raffle bots, actually, so slightly different, because these days a lot of companies are turning to raffles to try and make it fairer for their customers to try and deal with scalping. But bots are going to try and get past any kind of thing you put in place, and they're quite good at doing raffles as well. So yeah, bots went after these, and these are now being sold for astronomical figures on the kind of the secondary market, like £26,000 there, when the RRP was less than 400.
So actually, what you're describing here is kind of double bot, isn't it? It's like bot that obviously creates an account. It's an account creation bot, and then bot enters the raffle. So therefore, the bot gives itself the bots give themselves an unfair advantage of being able to get the goods, because there's more bots than there are people potentially, right?
Exactly. So first, all the bot needed to do was be quicker to the checkout process. That was kind of your traditional scalper bots. And then once they started doing raffles, it was like, okay, it doesn't matter how quick you are, you just need an entry. How can you get more entries? Well, you need more accounts. And what's really good at doing mass account creation, any repetitive task? Well, bots are great at doing that as well. So,
yeah. So Sandy, I'd ask a question on this in the context of, let's say, Tiffany and Nike as a business. They could say, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Like, we sold 1,800 pairs of sneakers at the retail price. Why does it matter whether there's resale? Is that maybe why this isn't seen as such a big problem? Maybe why it's not illegal?
You raise a really good question, Chris. Why should retailers care about this? And from one perspective, you might say, well, we sold out all our inventory. That's awesome. Great. The problem is, if you sell out a huge amount of your inventory to bots, you have a lot of really angry, frustrated human customers who are not going to buy into the next thing. And you're going to start, draining customers that way. The other part of this is that if your customers aren't able to buy the latest pair of sneakers, that means they're also not buying other peripherals. Maybe they're not buying a second pair of sneakers. Maybe they're not buying socks. Maybe they're not buying leisure wear that's also available. If you have humans that are buying in, they're often buying those things. Bots just buy the sneakers. You go back to gaming consoles, which Cyril mentioned have been a very popular item. The bots are buying the consoles, but they're not buying additional controllers. They're not buying games. So if you are selling a large amount of your inventory to bots, you're actually losing sales on some of the peripherals that are associated with that.
Well, yeah, we've definitely heard of brands who are quite upset about retailers not protecting consumers, especially in the context of something as limited a run in this example. And I suppose the other natural example in terms of something that's extremely limited and almost can't be recreated is ticketing. In fact, I would say that certainly in my view, we see it's ticketing that feels like it gets the most coverage in the context of bots and scalpers, most recently Eurovision. But there's also a slightly weird thing around the way tickets and the resale market works, right?
There is. And yeah, I'll preface this by saying it was very clear that Taylor Swift was really angry about how this was handled. But you look at something like ticket sales, and unlike the other retail examples I was talking about, when you go to buy a ticket, there aren't any other peripherals that you're buying. There aren't really any add-ons. So if all the tickets to Eurovision or a stop on the Taylor Swift tour, if a lot of them are bought up by bots, Ticketmaster or whoever is managing the sale doesn't necessarily see any difference. The other part of this is that the resale isn't happening on a secondary site. All the secondary sales are also happening on Ticketmaster. So unlike other retailers where they potentially lose money because of lack of peripherals or lose money from, the profit on other sales, all of the sales, both the primary and the secondary from resale of from bots, all go through them. It's a very different dynamic, and it might explain why it's been a little bit harder to move forward in that ticket sale domain to really push for fighting bots.
So I suppose the next question I would naturally ask then, given the title of the webinar, what would be the reasons for looking to make this illegal? Andy, I guess I'd ask you what would drive, I suppose, the idea that this is something that should be made illegal. What would be needed for that to happen?
That's a good question, Chris, and it's usually the first thing that people say, and we've seen recently, the US Congress asking this question, and similarly, we've had UK Parliament has tried to do something about this, and the reason why generally is that you end up, as in these examples here that we're seeing at the moment, with a lot of very angry fans who feel that they can't get to see the act that they really want to see, and that tends to lead to very angry acts, and when the acts are angry, that tends to be when we get some kind of momentum behind it. However, it's actually quite a complex problem to solve, because if you look at how would we make this illegal, the first question would be, what would you actually make illegal? Would it be, like the means that you use to purchase the tickets, which is what has been attempted in some cases to say it's actually illegal to buy a ticket using electronic means. But if you say that, then what's counted as electronic means or automated means? Because there's a wide range of bits of software that people use legitimately to help them buy tickets. We could automate using something like Alexa to say, keep checking that site till tickets become available. Is that violating that law in that case? People are using this to make buying the ticket buying process easier for them. They know it's a complex environment that they've got to operate in. You could kind of put some law in place saying it's illegal to violate any of the restrictions put in place, and that's true in, again, some places have attempted this. So if there's restrictions that the ticket seller has in place and you violate those, so the amount of tickets or by using other people's addresses and to create fake accounts, then that's illegal. Again, it's fairly difficult to enforce, and it kind of puts things in the hands of the ticket sellers to put those restrictions in place, and then they have to police that to determine if people have done that. Another way you could do, and again, this in the UK, this is the case for football tickets, for example, is that once you buy those tickets, you cannot resell them. You cannot give them to other people. That again does solve the problem, but it also punishes legitimate users. So if you buy a ticket, and potentially these tickets, you're buying them 18 months, 2 years ahead of a show, and then you for many legitimate reasons can't attend the show, most people would feel that it's reasonable to be able to pass that ticket on to someone else. So stopping that is particularly unpopular. And again, a lot of these things, and we've already alluded to this with the raffles approach, you end up punishing legitimate customers, not bot customers, because bots will find a way around it. Legitimate customers can't. And then the last one would be actually to say, well, we're not going to punish the bot operator in this case. We're going to punish the person who buys the ticket and actually make the act of purchasing and using a ticket illegal. Again, this is actually the case in the UK for football tickets. If you buy a ticket off someone and use it, then you can be prosecuted for that. It's not often kind of enacted, but it is theoretically illegal. And in that case, that is definitely seen as punishing the person who's had to buy this ticket. And I think this comes into what I think is a very interesting angle in this discussion about scalper bots and illegality, is that the person who is buying the ticket and using it ultimately, and if you read all the kind of press coverage on this, those people have had to pay 1,000 times the cover price for a ticket, are often portrayed as victims, but they're not victims. They're actually complicit actors in this. If they weren't buying it, the bots wouldn't be buying it in the first place. And as soon as you kind of push anything that ends up punishing them, then they're portrayed as victims rather than what they are, which is actually a part of this.
Andy, you raise a really good point there in terms of the people that are using the bots. And Chris, I'm going to show briefly some data that we found at Forrester, which is about, I would say, the vicious cycle around the people that are looking for bot services and bot operators. And what we found is that 15% of US online adults have at some point in the last 12 months or so used a shopping bot or a bot service to buy hard to find products. So we've got a bit of a vicious cycle. Users see that they can't get in to a sale because it's being overtaken by bots. They think, okay, if I can't beat them, join them. I'm going to look for a bot service. Now you see more bots that are funded and enabled in order to buy into these products. And you can imagine that over time, these numbers are only going to get higher as more people see that the only way to get what they want is to buy into a shopping bot. Andy, to your point, that's the exact opposite of what we want to happen. But you're right. If we punish the humans in this, that creates some challenges as well. And ultimately, a lot of the bot operators are not going to be deterred by this is illegal.
Well, I think also if you read between the lines of that stat, what I immediately thought was, if this survey was those aged between 18 and 35, that percentage might be even higher. So to your point about it getting worse, the tech native adult, US adult, is more likely over time to use technology in order to solve this problem. And doesn't that end up creating an arms race? Cyril, I expect there are already examples of where we see this sort of bot arms race for particular things. So have you got examples of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every bot's not only competing against people who don't have bots, but they're competing against other bots. And so I find this stat fascinating because it's actually quite hard to get hold of a good bot, because once a bot becomes good enough, they almost start kind of staggering releases and put people on wait lists because they don't want too many people on a good bot, which that means that, if you've got a good bot and there's 5 people on it, they're going to be able to get 1,000 whatever item if there's kind of 5,000 released, right? Once you have 50 people in it, they're only going to be able to get 100 because there's less inventory available per person. So the good bots are going to try and stagger who can actually access them. And that's not even including the price of the bots, right? Some of these retail for like $500 or more. And that's not even on the secondary market if you're buying it from someone else. So they're competing against themselves. And this means that people are either doing group buys where like you get a whole community who just buys one bot and kind of using that themselves. But also people are even trying to use bots to buy bots, because it's like it's kind of this whole circle, right? Like, I need to get hold of this bot to help me buy something. The only way I can get this is using another bot to get it. And you start to think, where does this stop? But just to kind of something Sandy mentioned earlier around kind of if you can't beat them, join them. One of the things we saw last May with the big US baby formula shortage was people using bots to kind of buy baby formula. But then we also saw people trying to use bots to buy it in a good way, almost saying that we know people are using this to like exploit it and sell these on. I know some people who need to get baby formula. I've got access to a bot. I'm actually going to do the nice thing and use my bots to get it for them, which from one angle can be seen as doing good, but it's also exacerbating the problem that the people who don't have access to that bot now have less baby formula to use well. So it brings a weird kind of was that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, and kind of where do you draw the line on the ethics of it?
Well, this is exactly what makes it a grey area, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the application of the technology to be able to scale. And I mean, we could drift right into the whole AI narrative now, but actually it's the idea of scaling and automating something that is designed for a single human to use to lots of people at once, actually could be used for good, but also in a lot of examples is being used for not so good. And that is what that's what turns it into a grey area, I think, isn't it?
You definitely see cases where good intentions are weaponized, right?
Mm.
During the height of, COVID vaccine rollouts, you saw a lot of bots that were showing up vaccine availability times. And from one standpoint, that's great. I know, what drugstores near me are potentially offering the vaccine. I can get an appointment slot. That's great. However, there was also an example, I believe it was during India's vaccine rollout, where the bots weren't just showing the available vaccine slots, they were actually selling those vaccine slots to desperate citizens. That's the weaponization part of it.
So I guess the question that would naturally lead to is are there ways that a business would be able to identify, I guess, beyond buying a solution, does the traffic give them clues, for example, that scalping is happening? Stats that are at their fingertips, like if someone is going through a checkout process far too quickly, is that stuff that they can see and potentially think that they should need to do something about? What I'm getting at is, are businesses complicit in this as well, or do they have ways that they could be looking to fix this to make it better for their customers?
So I think the answer in a very clean room world where no one had ever looked at bots before would be absolutely yes.
Mm.
So if you were to just open a ticketing site now with no restrictions on it whatsoever, no defense mechanisms, you would see the bots go through the process within seconds constantly, and you would have, and presumably you would be doing no kind of post-transaction validation. You would see lots of orders from the same address and things like that. Now, the world we live in is not like that, obviously, because all the obvious things that can be done are being done kind of as standard by any of the vendors that are involved in this kind of process. So what we have seen, though, is that with every defense mechanism that you put in place, the bots just learn what you've done and they will be slightly ahead of you. And anything where you try to do anything very kind of static and rules-based, all you will see, and we've got examples that we've seen with our customers in the past of, well, we've put rate limit in place and the bots will just try until they figure out the amount that they're allowed to order, and then they'll just operate just at that level. So there isn't a simple solution to this because of the complexity of the bots. Now you need a relatively sophisticated solution to be able to effectively block bots, otherwise they will just bypass those obvious defenses.
This might be hopping around a bit, but I wanted to focus in a little on what the actual business, likely business impact is here. And I guess this is a question for you, really, Sandy. And I'm thinking particularly about things like, brand impact, customer experience. If you're business heavily invested in, for example, doing business online, and you've built great apps that help make for great user experience so that people come and make purchases or use your site in whatever way the business wants it to be used. How important should the idea of not ruining that customer experience be? Like, where does it figure in how the business thinks about impact on that?
Look, I mean, at a basic level, if bots are killing your customer experience, you're losing customers. And ultimately, the goal of any organization is to do business with customers, to sell stuff, whether it's goods, whether it's services, whether it's tickets, sneakers, whatever it is. Their goal is to connect with customers. If customers are frustrated, They're going elsewhere. The other thing that happens, though, and we definitely saw this in the case of the Taylor Swift ticket fiasco. We saw this with Eurovision, I think. Not only do customers get frustrated and maybe not come back or in some cases go elsewhere, but they're also going to post their bad experiences to social media, or they're going to talk to a reporter. And so this isn't just something that stays between the company and the customer. Ticketmaster got hauled in front of US Congress because of what happened with Taylor Swift. So there are consequences in terms of your brand and your perception that go beyond just the immediate customer experience as well.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting though about the Taylor Swift thing and the Congress appearances and all that, it's in my mind I was trying to connect who does the lobbying, who is the industry group or consumer group that is able to lobby to ensure that this is a thing that at least is on the radar of governments, or is at least a problem that governments feel they have to solve. Because I reckon where we are today, beyond that Taylor Swift stuff, I'm not sure. I don't feel like there's an appetite right now for whatever reason.
I think historically, if you look at this, the lobbying comes from the person in government who have themselves or their family been affected by this. Nearly always, in the UK, a lot was driven by the fact that people in government couldn't buy PlayStations. That it was that, and I think that the Taylor Swift was probably similar to that. There's enough outcry that resonates directly with the lawmakers, but there isn't. There are fan organisations who do lobby for this, both in the UK and the US, but I don't believe they kind of are the ones who drive the agenda as much as the public outcry about affairs like this. And high profile things like Eurovision, like Taylor Swift, do get the attention of government, and government do move to act in that kind of situation.
Yeah, I agree, Andy. Frankly, I think if there was more professional lobbying around this, I think there would be a higher technical understanding of some of the options for fighting bots, and more questions from government about what they were doing to prevent it. I think that I would say almost naivete of the questions that are often being asked in these hearings shows how little expertise is being brought to bear from a lobbying standpoint.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you mentioned the technical, because that was the next bit that I wanted to get to. I'd had a conversation with one of our other researchers and asked, and I think it was in the context of Eurovision. So is the scalping of these tickets illegal or what then? And I got the classic information security researcher answer, which was, it depends. So actually, I'd quite like to explore, Cyril, just for a minute. And let's do it in the context of the Computer Misuse Act, right? So there is a set of legislation that says if you use computers for badness, you will get arrested, and you're breaking the law. I guess what you're about to tell me is that if scalping activity, as an example, is done in a particular way, it avoids that kind of legislation. So if you were doing it in the US or the UK, as an example, you effectively would be able to evade that legislation. Is my assumption right?
Yeah, so the Computer Misuse Act is really about accessing a computer that you haven't got the right to access.
Sure.
So scalping wouldn't fall into that unless you were maybe breaching an account of someone and using that to scalp. So really, I think, Andy, you mentioned that there's kind of there's the football ticket laws where you can't sell, an unauthorized person can't sell a football ticket in the UK. And then you've also got some rules around scalping, but that is in terms of if you're trying to buy more, if you're using a bot or automated software to buy more items than the retailer allows, so you're breaching the limit of items, that's illegal. And I believe that's a fine in the UK. I think the Bots Act in America is similar, where it's circumventing security measures, which are there to enforce purchasing limits. So if for Eurovision, for example, you're allowed to buy 6 tickets as a person, and I use the bot to buy 6 tickets, that would be legal because I haven't gone over the limit. If I use that to buy 7 tickets, that then becomes illegal under the current.
But you know the question
legislation.
I'm going to ask next. How could you how would you know whether someone has done that then?
Exactly. So that exactly, that's the issue. And then also, if I hire 10 people to all go buy 6 tickets for me, does that count? Does that not count? That's where you get into this kind of grey area with the law, which is why you get the "it depends" answer quite a lot.
Because there's quite a lot of moving parts in terms of how you run what we would call an attack. How you run the attack, I suppose, it really decides whether what you're doing is illegal or not. Is what you're saying.
And I think, Chris, that is before you even get into the conversation about how you would ever enforce that. I mean, if you're sat in Russia or South America or China buying these tickets and then reselling them via an international resale market, who
no one is ever going to get to you. I tell you what will happen if they find out that you've done it. The DOJ will release a strongly worded indictment with potentially made up names in, and you will never get arrested. That's what they send out, these great edicts like, this person in China is terrible and we are definitely going to get them, and they never do.
And I'm sure China will extradite that person to us. Yeah, no problem.
They'd be right on it. They'd be
right.
Yeah.
See, and then this is why you end up with the only effective means of implementing any of these laws being to punish the people using the tickets. And they do that. I guess the aim would be to drive down demand for the tickets because no one will use them. I think in the terms of, if we look in the UK, the Football Resale Act has been relatively effective. It has taken away that formal market for the resale of football tickets because the secondary sites won't sell them because they know it's illegal, and it's fairly clear cut that is illegal.
But I get the impression that the legislation has to be very specific to the nature of the scalping in order for it to actually be able to work. And so then that means it's never really going to work, is it, at scale?
It requires the active involvement of the football clubs themselves to do, and for that they're relatively keen on doing that because they don't want away fans in their home fans and trouble being caused like that. But it does leave you with that big problem of, if you've legitimately bought a ticket and you want to allow someone else to use it, most people will expect that to be allowed. And it seems reasonable. And I think as soon as you get to the point where legislation seems unreasonable, then that is probably not good legislation. That's not where governments generally want to go with what they're legislating.
So to go back to Sandy's point about if you can't beat them, join them, and I'm really interested to get into how easy is this to do. I have a little looping video that I'm just going to share. There is a bit of background noise on it, but while we are watching this loop, Cyril, can you just explain what we're actually looking at?
Yes, so this is the user interface of a scalper bot, which is purchasing, I believe it was Jordan 1s. It was
They're definitely Nike. They're definitely Nike trainers. Yeah.
So as you can see just from there, each of these sneakers cost 110 euros, and they've spent 500,000 euros on those. And then, so this may be either an individual person or a group, but you can see that they're well funded. The bot is having absolutely no problems purchasing these. And if you can imagine them having even like a 10%, markup on each of those, that's still quite a lot of money they're getting.
I think the other thing to call out from that video, from my point of view, is that this piece of software that is being used here to manage bot activity is essentially an ERP system. This doesn't just buy the sneakers, it buys lots of them, it tracks all the sales, it tracks your stock, and it also tracks your resale. So you can, via this software, you can be distributing these across resale markets and basically automating the whole process of that. So I think this just illustrates just how sophisticated the infrastructure, software, tooling behind scalper bots is today. It is as good as any ERP system that you will buy, and it's not just kind of out there on the dark web or anything. This is publicly available software.
Because of course it's not. Because of course it's not illegal. So And so I mean, let me make a sweeping statement, and let's see how the room responds to the virtual room responds to it. If I was buying ransomware as a service, and I was deploying my ransomware to businesses and expecting them to cough up money that they didn't really owe me because I've used a tool to ransomware them, that's one example. That's one scenario. If I have bought a load of trainers and meant that those trainers are now, and I'm someone who really wants those trainers, and they're now only available on a resale site at a markup of 320%, isn't that 320% markup a ransom? Aren't I effectively being ransomed for an item that is so scarce that I would have to go through the resale? I mean, I feel I'm definitely being conned, that's for sure. But if I really wanted them, am I being ransomed?
I think that the difference to that, in my mind, is you want it, you're not required.
Being forced to, I'm not being forced to do it.
You know, and it's the same with
tickets. What if I really want it?
You know, if your favourite band are only playing one show in the year, possibly their last show, and you really want to go to that, it isn't fair that you should have to. Someone is pay, is demanding that you pay a lot more than you should have to, and they're keeping the difference. It clearly isn't fair, and it clearly isn't right. But it's not. I wouldn't quite categorize it as ransomware, because I think it's still your choice.
It's a choice to make,
isn't it?
I think the way you can look at this, Chris, is contrast the denial of happiness versus the intent of harm. Ransomware is the intent of harm.
Yeah, those. I suppose I'm old enough to think that those two are pretty close together at this stage in my life. But yeah, I think you're almost certainly right. I guess the other question that I would naturally ask is, how accessible is this kind of stuff? This is a question for Cyril, I guess. How accessible is it? And I'm assuming that in the context, particularly of the world of sneakers, actually, are we arriving at a point where if you don't have this, you're probably going to miss out?
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer this for sneakers, also for tickets, because it's interesting to draw the parallels, because one of them is illegal and to some degree one is completely legal. So for sneakers, these bots, their creators are advertising almost daily, look how good our bot is, trying to get people to buy it. Because if I develop a bot, I'm charging them for a license, like a monthly fee for a license, so I make money having people use the bot. How easy is it to get? If you haven't got a bot, it's quite hard to get one, but once you're in that ecosystem, it's quite easy to continue. You can kind of trade bots, and there's a whole community there. For ticket bots, it's a lot more underground, because there is this air of illegality about it. It still happens. We've seen with kind of Taylor Swift and stuff that they definitely still happen, but they are not advertised as widely. Kind of the bots themselves, like the tickets are advertised once they've been bought and they're being sold, but kind of the means of getting them is not as advertised.
And starting to think now about what the future holds here in terms of both this, this problem and potentially other challenges that might appear on the horizon. It feels natural to me that we would start talking about AI. Sandy, can you think of where there might, where there are applications for, AI for real? So not just bots, and bots are programmed to do a job, aren't they, or automated and at scale, but real general purpose AI, and how that could also be applied to this, potentially getting worse.
Well, I think, Chris, we're already seeing it to some degree, because the most sophisticated bots are using some amount of AI in order to learn human behavior, impersonate human behavior, and not look like bots. And I think it was Andy earlier who said there's this constant game of one-upsmanship with bots. They're constantly learning, they're constantly evolving. That evolution, as we're seeing with some of the AI platforms that are out there accessible to the public now to play with, like ChatGPT, that evolution of learning is a huge crux of AI, and you're going to see that as the bots continue to get more sophisticated. So honestly, and Cyril, I'd be curious what you think. I think to some extent we're already there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the main ways bots use AI at the moment is capture. So it used to be historically, I mean, bots have always been able to get past capture, but historically they'll get a capture, they'll send it to a group of humans to solve it for them and pass it back to the bot. These days, bots just use image classification to find kind of which squares have a traffic light or whatever the capture challenge is and solve that themselves. And then obviously with things like ChatGPT and GPT-4 coming out, these large language models, and there's just so much more accessible AI for bot developers to use. And maybe it won't be ChatGPT itself because, OpenAI are trying to put in kind of frameworks to stop abuse of that, but kind of the underlying technology. If a bot developer can take kind of, that kind of machine learning and actually apply that, train that on bots is built, train on defenses that have worked so far, they can create their own chat GPT. Maybe they have a bot GPT, which can actually, help them develop better bots. And, in the near future, we're going to see this skyrocket.
And the biggest problem there would be that they are, well, obviously they're learning all the time, so they're able to continually retool, but also they don't give up, do they? They don't get tired out. If they're running an attack and they're continually retooling, they'll just keep going, I assume, up to a point.
So I want to throw a caution out on that because, okay, the bots themselves may not get tired, but at the end of the day, somewhere in the chain, there is a human behind the bot. And there is a human that is looking at the cost of that bot operating.
Of course,
and
yeah.
looking at their wallet running down as the bot continues to try new things. And if they are not successful, maybe the bot is still raring to go. Sure, human may want to turn it off.
Yeah. So their business model does kind of rely on them effectively using their compute power and the cost of that compute power in a way that makes sense. Otherwise, what's the point? They're not going to gain anything, are they?
If it costs me $300 to buy a $100 pair of shoes that I can sell for $299.
Yeah. I think I just wanted to one thing I wanted to add around AI. A recent example was a scraper bot. So a scraper bot was a very normal, ordinary scraper bot was being used to access Getty Images' publicly available library, and all of those images have watermarks on them, right? And what they were doing was they were scraping all that entire library, and then they were using AI to remove the watermarks and then recreate the images so that they were different enough that they would look like the Getty image but not be the Getty image. And oddly enough, Getty Images felt that this might have been a misuse of their intellectual property and decided to sue that company for, actually it's a crazy amount of money, it's like $1 trillion or something. But it led to a question around, so we've talked a lot about goods, we've talked a lot, we've talked about tickets, we've talked about sneakers, we've probably touched on PS5s, peripherals, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's a whole thing around intellectual property. And should we consider whether that might also need to be a thing that has some legislation around it? Like if I'm just going to access information that belongs to Getty and decide to do something with it that I could potentially profit from, is that a problem that needs to be fixed, or is that just evolution of technology?
Again, we've seen discussion of this quite a lot over the years around people like LinkedIn, for example. Their information is all they have. That's their business, and they have tried in the past to put stop companies using that information by scraping. And the traditional kind of legislative position was that if you can gain that information by sitting there manually and reading it and noting it down, then that is not actually stealing that information. Now, obviously, the world changes when you can look at every page on LinkedIn within minutes, and then you can pull all that information into an ML engine and start doing all sorts of things with it. So I think that is something that we will have to see change on. And I think the the Chat GPT example is a very good one of that, in that takes information that other people have gathered and it amalgamates it with other sources of information and portrays it as its own almost opinion. And there's still a journey we need to go on to determine whether or not it should be crediting where it gets that information from. If it changes the opinion of what someone said, should it be crediting that? And how does that work for sites that, putting that information out is their business? That's what they want. It's taking that information and it's not driving people towards the source of that information. So I think there is a lot of discussion that needs to go on, particularly around that.
And then lastly, as we sort of move towards the end, I wanted to explore a little how the sort of the explosion in use of APIs, and I suppose this actually goes directly to data being more, easily accessible. What does this mean for how bots are being used and bot attacks? Cyril, what do we see in terms of what difference APIs make to perhaps traditional websites? What's been the change?
Well, I guess APIs are really there for machines, right? It's for machines to communicate. If a bot wants to access something, let's take scraping as the example. A bot can either try and render a page, find the elements in the page it wants to gather and scrape that. And that might, change any time someone, changes the front end, maybe moves a CSS selector, that might change the site. That's quite hard to maintain. Or they could just go to the source of the information, the API that's feeding that website, and just gather that all in a nice JSON format, easily passable by the bot. And, kind of APIs and just the use of APIs has grown, and kind of bot developers are realizing let's stop actually going to the website, let's just go to the API, especially if the API itself isn't protected. A company might have a lot of protection on the website, but the API itself is just essentially an open door. So that's what we're seeing a lot of now.
Sandy, so to that point, if those kinds of threats exist, how are businesses going about looking to solve that problem? If they're going to use more APIs, which I think the stats tell us that they are, how are they looking to make sure that they meet those security challenges?
Yeah, so first of all, the stats definitely say that organizations are using more APIs. Again, talking to developers within, as part of our Forrester surveys, 31% of our dev respondents said their firms have public-facing APIs, and 35% say that their orgs have B2B APIs. And those numbers have grown year over year. So, on the one hand, there is, the technical solutions on the bot protection side, and most bot protection tools these days not only handle your traditional monolithic applications, they handle APIs because, frankly, they have to. Applications are built out of APIs. So while APIs are a different architectural approach, if you're protecting your application, you have to look holistically at the APIs. And we have seen examples of API-based bot attacks. There was an incident a couple of years ago, going back to LinkedIn, with a lot of public information scraped, and it was through an API. So there's definitely that part of it. The one thing I would say on this, beyond the standard bot protections that we talk about, you can rate limit APIs. And if you haven't rate limited APIs, you're opening yourself up to more of that mass scale type of attack. So understand what your APIs are doing, and if it makes sense to rate limit them to help control things as well, that's an option.
Yeah, I think I'd follow that up by saying, from our point of view and the people that we help protect, we are seeing APIs as often the first point of attack now, and especially for scalping attacks, because there are APIs, often APIs where you can check availability of products, and you use that as the first point of entry. And it's, again, I think your point around rate limiting is a good one, Sandy. Just look at what is legitimate use of the API. It won't solve all your problems, but putting some basic protection around there will help. And if you can, look at what APIs are used earlier in the kill chain. So, as I said, rather than just needing to protect the checkout APIs, for example, if people are using stock checking APIs or inventory APIs to see availability, and that's the point at which the scalpers get in. By protecting those APIs, you can often protect the rest of your system as well.
Yeah, it seems obvious to me that, as you know, all these four different forms of intellectual property, whether it, you know, whatever data it is that you're making accessible through your API, it's like an old CTO of mine used to say, you know, data's like oil. When it leaks, everyone gets covered in it. I think that it sort of ties directly to that. There's so much now openly available data, and perhaps the assumption is that data is only going to be accessed by in legitimate means by legitimate people, and I think that's not necessarily the case. And so I think the clear connection between the bot challenge and the API challenge is obviously there. Okay, we're at more than 50 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap us up here. It's just left to me to thank Sandy, Cyril, and Andy. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you all as well for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.